Hey guys. Um, so a couple of days ago, I sort of stated an intent that I was going to cover the Henry Nowak case. It's not just going to be the Henry Nowak case. It's going to be kind of the wider issues of the state of the UK, um, the public perception of mistrust in the police, whether there is two-tier policing and justice. There's going to be quite a few things in this, really. What happened to Henry Nowak is, I think that is just been the straw that has broken the camel's back in terms of, the public have had enough, um, and rightly so. Um, I'm going to try and do this as politically neutral as possible. I do like to keep politics out of my content. And I know I've had messages from people appreciating me for that. Because my passion is the law. Um, Unfortunately, it's not always possible to separate politics from the law because the law is made by our politicians. So there is an overlap. Um, and I welcome any comments from anyone as long as they're respectful. But, whatever political side you lean to, I welcome everyone to kind of participate in this debate. With this case, the one thing I will say is there are some idiots that are kind of, parroting some stuff about this case to try and cause division, or suppress the public anger. They are the extreme and the exception. So, but other than that, though, the United Kingdom, all sides of the political spectrum are actually, for the first time in a long time, fairly united that, this is an outrage, it's a controversy, and there needs to be some serious action taken to prevent it from happening again. So I will be using a combination of tools here. I have done a short PowerPoint presentation. I find them quite easy to kind of help me build a flow, I guess, because I haven't scripted anything. I will also be using clips from X accounts. I'm not an editor or a producer, so the switch between may be a little bit clunky. I apologise for that. I hope you bear with me. I really need to get someone on board who knows what they're doing. And also my microphone has not been, my new one has not arrived yet. So if the sound quality is not great, I am really sorry about that too. I will post links to all of the X accounts, the posts and videos that I do use. They will all be in the description, so you should be able to access them if there's any problem, say for instance with sound. I know I've had a few technical issues on that front as well. I did test it earlier and it worked, so hopefully everything should be fine this time. Okay, so let's see. Alright, so obviously the crescendo, I guess, was the incident itself, the murder of Henry Nowak on the 3rd of December 2025. In the lead up to this, there had been a series of what people were calling two-tier justice. Now, it was so bad that our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was being called two-tier Keir. So there was, a number of situations where there was, we've got a huge problem with an influx of illegal migrants at the moment, and that's gotten completely out of control. Unfortunately, obviously not all of them, but proportion of those migrants are engaging in criminal behaviour, whether it be stabbing people, harassing people. The rape of young girls is epidemic in this country right now. We are the rape capital of Europe. There is another controversy going on right now, which I will also be covering simultaneously, regarding the grooming gangs scandal, which has been going on for many years. Largely, not entirely, but largely, you know, sorry, I'm being distracted. Someone's calling me. Right, yeah, that was largely involving Pakistani men. And there have been cover-ups from all the way up the top of the chain in the police, the NHS, in the government, successive governments, not just one government. There have been calls for inquiries for years, first through the during the Conservatives' time in power, and now during Labour's time in power. The Conservatives didn't initiate any inquiry. Labour agreed to. They were literally dragged kicking and screaming into it, though. They did vote against it originally, and then they buckled to pressure and agreed to it. And then since then, it's just been chaos. Several survivors who were going to be participating on the panel resigned. They were then called liars in Parliament by the then safeguarding minister, Jess Phillips. I did videos on these. I have my own experience with Jess Phillips, which has been absolutely negative. In my opinion, she does not safeguard any girls, and that's my opinion, based on my own experience, which I talked about at length in my videos, where I talked about the grooming gangs and the failure that was the inquiry. Labour have kind of really not moved the inquiry any further forward, aside from appointing a chair who happens to be one of those people that was, in one of the institutions that failed these young girls, and is one of their own. So, not independent at all. What we did have, and what is coming out next week, is there's a new political party that's been formed by Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe was formerly Reform. He's an MP for what is now Restore Britain. He has conducted an inquiry. Now, it's not got the statutory powers of the government, but that's by the by. He has conducted the inquiry, worked with survivors, and his report on the grooming gangs will be out next week. So I will be covering that, because again, that is so important, and it's the only progress we've had in this entire saga, which is shameful. But I do congratulate Rupert Lowe on doing that. And again, he had support from multiple other political parties. He had, the full support of. There were some Labour MPs, some Reform MPs, and some Conservative MPs. So that's kind of just to get you to where we are. There has been a series of decisions where, someone might tweet about the grooming gangs or their unhappiness about, our country's own flag being demonised. If it's offensive if someone puts up one of our country's flags, whether it be the Union Jack or the St. George's Cross, the English flag. But the hypocrisy that the government were happy to fly literally any other country's flag. And people were feeling a bit kind of outraged that our own identity was being destroyed, to prevent any offence to anyone else, which was, well, that was wild. But people who were tweeting about these issues were finding that they would be arrested at 3 o'clock in the morning because it would, it would be such a significant threat that, a van full of police officers would knock on your door 3 o'clock in the morning while you're in bed and hoist you out of bed and take you to the police station. Graham Linehan was, he's the writer of Father Ted and other series like Black Books. He was one such casualty of that, where he ended up being arrested by 12 police officers at an airport for a tweet. And I've done video on this too, I guess, so there are videos to that. I will put all these links as well. But yeah, 12 police officers, they didn't even let him get his medication. I think he had heart medication. They didn't even let him get that. It was just so wild. But people were spending more time in jail, tweeting outrage for, say, an immigrant who had, a migrant who had, violently raped a young girl, than the rapist migrant was for the offence he committed against the young girl. We have seen recent weeks, there are 3 migrant lads who, on 2 separate occasions, they raped 2 different women multiple times. They filmed themselves doing it. They were laughing. They held, knife to her and scared them, knife to the women and scared them. And they were found guilty of rape, all 3 of them. But they were not sentenced to prison because the judge did not want to criminalise them. And it was just absolutely horrific. There was a murderer, another migrant who went on a rampage killing of 3 people in Nottingham I think it was last year. His name was, bear with, because you know what I'm like with names, Valdo Kalakani. He stabbed 3 people. 2 of them were young students who were 19 years old, and then there was a third person who was a school caretaker who was 65 years old. For no reason whatsoever. They wanted to section him, but he was not sectioned on the basis of there was already an overrepresentation of black and ethnic minority people under section. And as a result, because he wasn't sectioned, he then went, he was free and he killed these people. There are a number of cases where it's this kind of leniency, perceived leniency for people of like ethnic background, but where the crimes were usually against white people. Not always, but they were usually against white people. But the British people then who might express frustration, outrage, attend a protest, would be harshly punished for, talking about it or, taking action. Now, we've had, Palestinian protests, Free Palestine marches, almost week in, week out, which have been absolutely fine as far as the government go. But as soon as a kind of right-wing marches is organised, recently we had the Unite the Kingdom march, there is, concern expressed, outraged, and, people who have a genuine sense that they are losing their country and their culture, they are referred to as Nazis. and bigots and fascists, and it's absolutely a crazy situation to be sort of living in at the moment. So the tension was already building. The reason I'm sort of going over this is just to kind of make the viewpoint, I guess, of why there has been mounting tension. But on the 3rd of December, 18-year-old student Henry Nowak, he was out on a night out. He was returning home from said night out, where he sort of crossed paths with Vikram Digwa, who was he was a Sikh young man, and he ended up being fatally stabbed. Now, when I say he ended up being fatally stabbed, he was chased and stabbed from behind, including in the legs, and there was a fatal stab to the chest, and there was, cuts to his face. Now, Vikram Digwa's family came out. His mother apparently took the knife and concealed it because he was carrying a knife. His mother took the knife and concealed it, and his brother allegedly called 999 and asked for the police, and cited that Henry Nowak had been, racially aggressive to his brother, had assaulted his brother, and knocked off his turban from his head. And when the police arrived, there is video. I'll put a link to the video, but I'm not going to play the video, the body cam video from the police. It's very upsetting, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, but I do urge some caution if you haven't and you wish to see it. It is deeply upsetting. So when the police actually arrived, Henry Nowak said at least 9 times, "I have been stabbed." The police did not check him. In fact, they made a point of saying, "I don't think you have, mate." And you can hear that on the body cam footage of one of these officers. They then proceeded to pull his hands behind his back and cuff him, put him in handcuffs, which is just absolutely astonishing, because if you attend a scene and someone claims to have been stabbed, you should be checking for that at bare minimum and offering medical assistance. In fact, on the 999 call, on the full hearing, because there's a couple of versions, there is one shorter one, but on the longer version, I believe it's Vikram Digwa's brother who made the call, and he is directly asked, does this person, referring to Nowak, need medical assistance? And he confirms, yes, he does. So, and the police did not act upon it at that point, and when they arrived on scene and Henry Nowak told them that he had been stabbed, they did not listen. They were caught laughing, and they denied it as a possibility. They said, "I don't think you have, mate." And what actually happened was the police were there for over an hour with Nowak, and he was saying he couldn't breathe, and they were still not taking this seriously. And they still did not call for an ambulance. And in fact, they didn't do anything whatsoever until Henry Nowak lost consciousness. And at that point then, they called an ambulance and tried to provide medical assistance. And I do have an opinion from someone who is kind of like, he specialises in these kind of wounds. So I will go through that a bit later on. But yeah, but by making the false allegation that, he had been the target of a racial attack, Vikram Digwa kind of diverted the police attention, And Henry Nowak was not believed. He was the one that was put in handcuffs, and even when Vikram Digra was arrested, he was not put in handcuffs. That's right. And then there was a public outrage basically about the police judgment and bias, and that they had failed in so far as the duty of care that they owe to every individual, regardless of the claim that is being made. So, what was the human cost? Well, Henry Nowak has been described by those who knew him as a kind, diligent and ambitious young man with his whole life ahead of him. He was only 18 years old and just starting university. I think on a personal level, his death, it's not just a crime. It is the loss of a future, a son and a member of his community. So the family have spoken about this, and they have been quite detailed in the final moments which were captured on camera, and we only had the body cam footage released a couple of days ago. The family described the treatment that their son received as inhumane and degrading, and I bolded that because that is such a powerful statement. That he was denied even the most basic compassion owed to a dying person. However, what they have also requested is that, their son's tragedy not be weaponized to fuel division, hatred, or communal tension, and their focus remains on justice, not revenge, which is, absolutely fair. However, what I will say is, and this is from the kind of the British public, I think, their perspective is, the concern of if there is not a backlash, if the government is not put under pressure to do something, to change something, the way we police the justice system, that there will be more, that this will happen again and again. And it's been compared to the situation regarding George Floyd, which I think was back in 2020, where, there were riots. There was people taking the knee. Black Lives Matter was formed and become a trending hashtag. It still is, to a large degree. And people are sort of seeing this as, akin to a George Floyd moment, in that a young lad in handcuffs who was saying that he couldn't breathe then died. And it was due to, although he was obviously murdered by Vikram Digra. The police didn't murder him. But, in my opinion, they could have helped him, and I do think they should be investigated for effectively aiding and abetting. I think there's some kind of, collusion, not a collusion, but, they're not innocent in this at all. And to just, to not even check someone who has said, I've been stabbed. Well, I don't understand why you would do that. And you only have to look at the body cam footage and see how white Henry Nowak's hand was. You can physically see how much blood had drained from his body. It was absolutely shocking, because whilst blood may not have been particularly visible in the dark, and it may have been largely contained internally, and we know he choked on the blood that went into his lungs from the chest wound. So he may not have needed the physical appearance of a lot of blood, but you at least check. I mean, he had a cut on his cheek. And if I can just look for... I'm going to try and pull up something actually, just to, because you can see what I mean. Where is it? Here we are. Yes, right. Okay, let's share that. This is a picture of Bikram Digra at the scene. He is still wearing the knife. His mother subsequently hid it, but he was still wearing the knife in this picture. Okay. So we go back to this. Okay. So this for the UK, this is not just Henry Nowak. This is bigger than Henry Nowak. And whilst I completely agree, the family have asked for their son not to be, used as an excuse to incite violence and hatred, disproportionate hatred, and I completely get that. But you can't ignore what has happened and the failings institutionally by the police and by the government. So the allegations are that largely it's reform and conservative, but they're arguing that police have developed a two-tier culture, granting preferential treatment to minority communities out of an institutional fear of being labelled racist. And I won't go too heavily into the history, but there was a huge case in 1993, the murder of Stephen Lawrence, which was a racially aggravated murder. And although the police did not murder Stephen Lawrence, they were highly criticised for their handling of the investigation. They still to this day have not brought all of his attackers to justice, and it caused a huge backlash, because back then, yes, you could say that there was an anti-black or anti-ethnic minority way of dealing in policing, and black and ethnic minorities were disproportionately stopped and searched, and it was a scandal. And it's not just the racism in the policing, there was also a lot of misogyny as well. There have been numerous investigations. We've seen WhatsApp messages that have been made public or leaked, where the police have taken photos of two young women who were deceased and made really misogynistic comments about them. So in the police we have such a problem on many levels, and racism was definitely one of them. But then there was a change, like in attitude, where, especially after the George Floyd death, where there was a real push to try to correct this. But what we ended up doing, I think, is overcorrecting it. And it wasn't, the criticism wasn't overly unfair either. So let me just take this down and put this up. So this is the police anti-racism commitment. This was put together by the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing. And there is one here, this particular section. I mean, most of it is not too bad, but this section is troubling. Our commitment to racial equity means producing equality of policing outcomes for people from different ethnic groups by responding to individuals and communities according to their specific needs, circumstances and experiences, with understanding that these will be radicalised and with the aim of reducing harm. Then this bit at the bottom, which is troublesome and I think has been misunderstood or misinterpreted. It does not mean treating everyone the same or being colourblind. I'm not sure. I mean, the people will have a different opinion on whether that is the right approach or not. For me, in terms of in legal terms, equality means just that, treating people the same. So where we are trying to take action to prevent, people being disproportionately discriminated against, we are trying to prevent that and have people on an equal footing. When we say, well, it does not mean that, racial equity does not mean the same as treating everyone the same. When the objective is not to treat everyone the same, the only thing then, in terms of anti-racism, is to treat people of ethnic minority better, that's not equality. That's not equality. With disability discrimination, people are, they are given, you go through a health assessment maybe, or see an occupational therapist. What reasonable adjustments can I make to make your job comfortable? To, they may get extra time off because they may have more hospital appointments. And that is leveling the playing field. It is not giving someone, an advantage over, other people. Let's just go back. So yeah, literally, this sort of approach was kind of embedded into the police training. So they were quite literally being told to treat ethnic minorities better than anyone else. And that's how that was moving for quite some time. So the catalyst. Officers placed undue weight on Digwa's unverified claim of a racial slur, allowing it to override the visible reality that Nowak was a gravely wounded victim in an urgent need of medical care. The political divide. The government and senior police leadership firmly reject the notion that systemic two-tier policing exists as institutional policy. The debate has nonetheless entered mainstream political discourse with considerable force. Now, I was watching, we have every Wednesday we have the Prime Minister and the sort of members of Parliament all pile in, and it's Prime Minister's questions. And I was watching it yesterday, and Keir Starmer, expressly stated that he rejects the notion that there is two-tier policing. But there is. By their own policy documents, there is. And when you look at the outcomes, who gets arrested for what offence, who gets the longer sentences for the same offence, there is absolutely two-tier policing. And it's not just policing itself. Last year, there were proposed sentencing guidelines which had to be scrapped because, they risked being seen as two-tier justice. And this was, aimed at benefiting ethnic minorities. It wasn't just ethnic minorities. Also would have benefited people who identified as transgender, where, basically, judges would seek extra information before deciding how to punish offenders from certain minority groups. It was sort of sold as guidelines to help address disparities between how different ethnicities are treated in the justice system. But, there shouldn't... I haven't seen myself disparities. Like, I'm not seeing people from certain racial background or certain, whether they all from LBGT groups being given longer sentences than, white people. That's just not happening. It is happening now, in reverse, but it wasn't a thing then. But they actually had to scrap this because, there were concerns that this would form two-tier justice. And this is just the sentencing. And don't just take my word for it. So I'm just going to play a little bit of Daniel's video, actually, the black belt barrister. It's literally just the first 10 seconds or so, just for his intro, just on this sentencing guidelines, which has been, shelved now. Oh.
This may be difficult to hear. If you are white, British and commit a crime, from the 1st of April you are more likely to get a custodial sentence as against a community order or a non-custodial sentence than somebody who is from an ethnic minority, a cultural minority or a faith minority community. Conversely, a transgender person is also less likely to go to prison than a white British person who is not transgender under new guidelines coming out in the 1st of April. Now, this...
I'll stop it there because that's kind of covered the point I was making. So, yeah, there was definitely problems. And, it was being talked about at the time by, big sort of influencers like Daniel, and I think other people as well. Steph the Alter Nerd was another one. So it was definitely a thing. They didn't end up bringing them in, but it's almost like it's being put into effect without the guidelines taken, being formally pushed through. So that's why the public, I feel like it's unfair when government ministers are saying, no, this is not a thing. Don't believe your eyes and ears. But it is happening in real time. And there are a litany of cases. I may do a standalone video just on those cases where there has been such a disparity between how people are treated. Like I say, some people have gone to prison for writing a frustrated or angry tweet about the criminal actions of someone from an ethnic minority, where that ethnic minority has committed a very serious crime that has provoked that outrage, but has not faced any prison or has had an unduly lenient sentence. Okay. So yeah, this part is talking about the document I've just shown you, which was the anti-racism commitment from the National Police Chiefs Council. And it advises officers to respond to individuals based on their specific ethnic needs, experiences and circumstances, which is a deliberate departure from so-called colourblind approach to policing. Proponents argued this was necessary to address long-standing structural inequalities. Critics contend it created a framework that in practice could lead to unequal treatment of victims. And here we are. So following the Nowak case, police chiefs launched an urgent review of the guidance, acknowledging that the principle of the absolute equality before the law must be unambiguous and non-negotiable. And then the MPCC chairman, Gavin Stevens, publicly acknowledged that the document's wording was clumsy, he's quoted as saying clumsy, and required immediate revision to eliminate any ambiguity that could justify differential treatment of individuals in crisis. So the MPCC, who wrote that document that baked into police officers' training to treat ethnic minorities give them special treatment, basically, is now saying, yeah, the wording's, clumsy, his words, and, we need an urgent review and, and revise this. So they're acknowledging that actually there was two-tier justice, because otherwise, why are you needing to revise anything? So Keir Starmer's full of shit. I'll probably get arrested for this now. So the search for accountability. There is going to be an IOPC investigation. They are conducting a thorough review of all body-worn video footage and evidence presented during the murder trial, examining the conduct of each officer at the scene. Now, out of the 4 officers who attended, 1 has resigned, which means that that person will not face any disciplinary action. It is uncertain as to whether any of the officers will face any criminal charges, but if they don't, 3 are still serving officers and could face disciplinaries, but the one who has resigned won't. In addition to that, there's the Home Office has issued a formal directive requiring the investigation into the police response to be completed within 3 months, signalling a political urgency attached to a credible and timely outcome, because this is not going away. There was a large-scale protest in Southampton only the other night. I've got some clips of that, which I'm gonna end with, because there is a humorous side of it. And this is not a funny case at all, but there was some typically British moments in those protests. There was also a really lovely moment as well, but we'll get there. Authorities have warned that online vigilantism following the case, including the dangerous misidentification of officers, has forced some police families to relocate their homes for their personal safety. One officer was erroneously they received death threats. They weren't even part of the Nowak case. They were misidentified and they received death threats, and they had to go into hiding for their safety. That is not a good situation, and that should not happen. It's just not the way to handle these things. As I've said with I said it in the Ian Watkins case as well. I had so many people, sort of almost congratulating the 2 inmates who were responsible for his murder. And it's like, it was and calling for them to be freed. And I was just, when I was going through it, and I really think people, sometimes when they say stuff like that, and I understand the outrage and anger of what Ian Watkins did, I really do. He'd been through the justice system, he'd received his sentence and was serving it. But it's like people almost forgot that the 2 people in there were there for crimes of their own and not minor crimes. One of those people, not the person who stabbed him, but the person who kind of aided, was a rapist and had raped a young woman multiple times, putting her through her own trauma. No, he should not be released just because he's killed Ian Watkins. And then the guy who actually killed him, murdered someone. Yeah, so no, these are not people who should be just released because, and people are saying, oh, well, they've done the world a favour, they've saved the taxpayers. No, they have not. They absolutely have not saved the taxpayers, because what has happened now as a result of the Ian Watkins murder is we have already had one trial, which has been declared a mistrial. So we are now going to get another trial in February next year. We are, there's going to be a compensation payout to Ian Watkins' family, and a lot of money is going to be spent. And plus, these two are going to have their own jail sentences extended as a result. If the best way that they could have saved the taxpayer money is if the pair of them hadn't also committed their crimes and been in prison, draining the taxpayer. But that's just my opinion. Vigilante justice, I don't agree with that. I understand people getting upset and angry, but, in this case, a police officer has been, she is a victim basically of wrongful identification, and now she is receiving death threats, which she has not, she does not deserve. So the wider crisis. The Nowak case has been brought to the surface, what senior figures describe as a dangerous undercurrent of tension running through the UK justice system. A perception widespread in some communities that the law is no longer applied with strict impartiality. And like I say, this has been coming up, probably years before the Henry Nowak case. So this is just like the pivotal point now where enough is enough for the UK. But there has been a series of poor judicial decisions, the way the police have been treated. There have been, 2 cases where police officers have been attacked by people from ethnic backgrounds. One was the Manchester airport. That went through 2 trials. A female police officer had her nose broken, and you can clearly see these 2 brothers attacking police officers. Sometimes from behind. They claimed self-defense, and they said they were in fear of their life being ended. There was nothing to support that. The whole thing was caught on CCTV. There was no mistaking what was happening there, and the police were only called because these 2 had already attacked someone else in the airport. The police attended because these people were being violent already. And the CCTV footage clearly shows the way that they are attacking the police officers. There is no self-defense there. It is crystal clear. And twice a jury could not reach a verdict. And now there won't be a 3rd trial. They've effectively gotten away with it. And then there was I think it was a pro-Palestine group who broke into I don't know, I can't remember the exact, but it was like a factory. They broke into a factory, were causing damage, and when the police attended to deal with that, one female officer had her back hit with a sledgehammer. It broke her back. And you had you had them being handled by the government. You had some MPs were turning up, they went on hunger strike, and MPs were going in support, demanding their release, and it was absolutely insane. Even, again, that incident was caught on CCTV footage. It is very clear what has happened. And at the end of the day, it does not matter who you are or where you have come from. If you commit a crime, if you are violent to someone, then you need to face the law. Equally, everything else shouldn't be, in my opinion, it should not be a factor of what your race is, what your sexuality is, what your gender identity is. It does not matter. You're committing a crime. So, British policing faces a deeply difficult balancing act. The necessary and ongoing work of addressing the historic legacy of racism within the service must not overcorrect to the point where officers hesitate to protect all victims equally. And that is what's happened here now, is a clear-cut case. This is why the Henry Nowak case has been so impactful. People are quite literally comparing the actions of politicians to this case and how they reacted when it was George Floyd. We have Keir Starmer criticising Donald Trump for, not acting swiftly enough, for trying to stop the protests in the wake of George Floyd. He took the knee for George Floyd, and he has done none of that for Henry Nowak. And he is the Prime Minister in charge of, overseeing what's happened to Henry Nowak. And he is being criticised by, his own public for not doing enough, for, causing so much division that the UK has got to this point. So there is an emerging consensus across the political spectrum, a broad agreement, if you'd like, which is forming that the only criterion that should govern a police officer's immediate response is the objective risk a person poses or faces, entirely irrespective of their background, identity, or the claims of those around them. And there is a failure to address these systemic questions, which credibly risks further erosion of public trust, particularly among the communities that policing reform was originally designed to serve. Okay. So it's just a little bit of some thoughts I had for a path forward. I think a lot needs to change. I do. I don't think it should all be hinged on the case of Henry Nowak. I think that's not fair for him, for his family. But there was significant failings that night, and his life could have been saved by the police, and I will get to that because this is the end of the PowerPoint, but I've got a few more videos and a little bit more background to go through. So I think there should be evidence-based policy, moving decisively beyond inflammatory political rhetoric to address legitimate documented policing failures, guided by facts, not partisan point scoring. I think that's important. Meaningful accountability. So we need to respect the IOPC investigation as the primary mechanism for justice in terms of the police officers. Allowing it to conclude with full transparency and acting decisively on its findings. And then honouring Henry's memory. The most fitting tribute to Henry Nowak is a justice system reformed to protect every citizen equally and impartially, one where no victim's suffering is overlooked because of who stands beside them. So, okay, just a small little look back, right? Because since this case, and so Bikram Digwa he was sentenced to life. In the UK, life quite often doesn't mean full life. He has a minimum of 21 years to serve. His mother is going to be served as well. She has been found guilty. She will be sentenced for her part in hiding the knife, and there will be charges brought against his brother, and there's further charges being brought against Bikram Digwa, but there's also charges going to be brought against his father and his brother as well, which I will get to in a minute. But this story, so we obviously find information then. So this guy is actually being called out by the Sikh community. He has been previously reported to police over the alleged theft of ceremonial Sikh training weapons. This was back on the 25th of August 2023. There was an alleged theft at the Sikh Gurdwara in Southampton. Martial arts lesson equipment, including blunt weapons, was reported missing from the temple between 23rd of July and 21st of August. Police confirmed 2 men in their 20s were arrested on suspicion of theft during the investigation, but they were both also released with no further action taken. And the people who were arrested were Digwa and his brother. So, yeah. What else have we got? Oh, yes. Okay, so there's actually been a previous encounter where Vikram Digwa was involved in a... Oh, I'm going to have to let it play and get to the end. He was involved in a road rage incident.
Come on! Come, recording him.
And that's him there in blue holding a sword.
You got big problem, mate. You got big problem. No knife, no knife, no knife.
Do samochodu, kurwa! Do samochodu właśnie.
Come on! Come, recording him.
So, and this is one of the MPs that we're talking about here when we say that, you know, how they reacted to Henry Nowak and then how they previously reacted to George Floyd. This is Zara Sultana. She's actually the same MP who was protesting against the hunger strike on the pro-Palestinian offenders and demanded their release. She said about Henry Nowak, he was a young man with his whole life ahead of him. His final moments were heartbreaking, pleading that he couldn't breathe before bleeding to death in handcuffs. The police failed in their duty to protect him. There must be real accountability for what happened. And then, while some have sought to weaponize his death for their own divisive agendas, Henry's family have shown extraordinary fortitude in their grief. And she's basically saying to people, look, yeah, this is bad, but, you know, let's not get too outraged about it. And then this person has rightly said, some have sought to weaponize his death for their own divisive agendas. Oh, fuck off. Because she has retweeted or quote tweeted Zara Sultana's George Floyd post, where she says, a year ago George Floyd was murdered by a police officer. Had it not been filmed, and were it not for the anti-racist protests it ignited, the officer would still be patrolling the streets. So she is literally saying to people that the protests that occurred were what, you know, had it not been for them, then the police officer would still be in his job. And she is supporting protests. But there is an about turn in this situation. Let's not do that here. She then goes on to say, justice isn't handed to us. It must be demanded, and we demand it. So, yeah, the hypocrisy of the MPs we have is absolutely astonishing. And then, you know, they even have the audacity, I guess, to say that anyone who does sort of say to the public, you need to be angry about this, we must protest. People like, you know, Tommy Robinson or Nigel Farage or Rupert Lowe, these are all bigoted people as far as Labour and, you know, the Green Party and anyone on the left are concerned. And even though they all, you know, there is like everyone is united in condemning this murder of Henry Nowak and the actions of the police. You know, they are very much on the left, the right. They're also condemning the right for doing the same things that they themselves did in the case of George Floyd. And again, two-tier government, maybe. I don't know. I just think if your opinion is that if police mishandle a situation and a death occurs directly or indirectly as a result of it, if your opinion in 2020 was that, you know, people should protest, people should demand justice, then fine, have that opinion, but stick with it 6 years, 5, 6 years later when it happens to someone else. Don't change that. Like, don't say, well, it was all right for me to you know, to demand justice and to incite protests when I wanted to, when I supported the cause, but you're not allowed to do it. I don't like that kind of, you know, hypocrisy. You don't have to be part of it, but people are rightly angry and they, you know, even have the right to express that frustration and anger in the form of a protest. And speaking of protests, I think that would be a good place to go next, actually. So this is, I actually come to this, I was actually going to say, wow, that was the most British form of rioting I've ever seen, chucking a wheelie bin at the police. But Hazel Appleyard has already said it for me. Yeah, it's absolutely the most British form of protest I've ever seen in my life. There was a lot of those kinds of protests where wheelie bins and dumpsters were, some of them were even set on fire and then pushed in the police's direction. What else have we got? Actually, I'm going to come back to the protests in a minute because I've just found this. So this is Keir Starmer's post. Now, pre-sentencing, he said nothing on the Henry Nowak case. He hasn't said anything about Henry Nowak pre-sentencing. But months before any trial or sentencing in the George Floyd case, this is what Keir Starmer said in the Houses of Parliament.
Can I start by expressing shock and anger at the death of George Floyd? This has shone a light on racism and hatred experienced by many in the US and beyond. I'm surprised the Prime Minister hasn't said anything about this yet, but I do hope that next time he speaks to President Trump, he will convey to him the UK's abhorrence about his response to the events.
So this was before Keir Starmer was Prime Minister. He was the opposition leader at the time. He became Prime Minister in 2024. And as I said, you know, this is what is pissing people off, actually. This is the crux of it, is there is clearly and blatantly been two-tier policing, two-tier sentencing, a full two-tier judicial system, two-tier, you know, sort of political representation. And he's not only, he is flat out denying it. He's denying that that is a thing, right? And basically saying, you know, acting like an idiot and going, well, I don't know what you're talking about. We're all seeing it. And we're all getting pissed off. And when we do, we get called bigots or racists or Nazis. They have quite literally called people who are patriotic about their country Nazis. They have literally arrested or jailed people for expressing online concern about the state of their country. They have fined people or, you know, called people who put up their own country's flags, they've called them Nazis. It's just absolutely shameful that the government is acting like this. And this, you know, he was elected on the basis that he would stop all the, the channel crossings from the illegal migrants. He was going to put a stop to that. He campaigned on a mantra that, the Tories had failed and he would smash the gangs, is what he said. He hasn't done shit. And if anyone mentions any concern, then, they are basically called fascists, bigots, Nazis. And it's absolutely shocking that the government is doing this. And like I say, when the rape gang survivors the people who were participating in the government's failed inquiry, when they resigned because they couldn't say out loud the ethnicity. They couldn't say it. And Jess Phillips went into the House of Commons and called them liars, even though that one of the survivors pulled out the email telling her she couldn't reference ethnicity. This is what is making people angry. This is even talking about it, I'm getting pissed off. But this is what is happening, and the mainstream media are pretending that none of this is happening and everything's just fine and dandy, and it's not. I'm going to go back to the riots in Southampton now. Say riots. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but I think it's just the start of what is to come. So I found this post actually. It's from Tommy Robinson. I'm not, I think the point he's making is an incredibly good one. I'm not an avid supporter of Tommy Robinson, but I don't agree with everything he says, but this point is actually pretty good, and again highlights the two-tier, hypocritical politicians that we have. What he says is, like I say, in response to the sort of left calling out the protests, which were very peaceful. I'm about to show you how peaceful they were actually. Yes, there were some bins being thrown. 11 police officers were hurt. It's made to sound a lot worse than it is. It was, probably a bruise. But they were in full riot gear and they were charging at protesters as well. But Tommy Robinson is sort of saying, well, hold on a minute. These people who are calling out us for protesting about what happened here, they're the ones that, were pulling down our statutes back when George Floyd died. They were literally pulling down statutes of sort of public figures, historical public figures, because of their links to slavery. It's like, and this was perfectly acceptable to them. This was absolutely fine. So many monuments and buildings were defaced in that period of time. Like, that's not what happened here. All that's really happened is, wheelie bins have been thrown around a bit. And, people are expressing outrage. They are asking very hard questions of the government, which is already in a weak position after the Peter Mandelson scandal that recently has taken place. If anyone wants to know more about that, I can do a separate video. Just let me know in the comment. But there was a whole scandal with Peter Mandelson over his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. So the government, there was already calls for Keir Starmer to resign for a general election, etc., etc. They've now intensified, and the government is basically just trying to silence everyone. Let's go and see what else we've got. Okay, so there is this post. Again, this I have to take with, this is someone's post. I will talk about it. I don't know how credible it is. we may hear about this more in due course, but basically what they were saying was that a specialist doctor, Dr. Magier, who is based in the Isle of Wight, is a qualified paediatric care lead and part of the critical care network, with experience in combat medicine training and a specialised course in treating severe injuries, including gunshot and stab wounds, has analysed the footage and claimed the aggressive police intervention may have contributed towards Henry's death. So, this doctor also disagrees with the pathologist's and judge's opinion that Henry Nowak had zero chance of survival. And I will say, I think that may have been true. I think there may have been some truth there, and we'll get to that. But basically, in summary, Henry Nowak was alive when the police arrived and likely clotted. Now, he was alive for a good hour as well with these injuries. Now, he believes that the aggressive police intervention likely tore a clot. A major trauma department hospital was only minutes away from the scene. The judge and the pathologists were far too lenient on police. Yes, they were. And Henry Nowak had a 50% chance to survive. He is absolutely convinced that had he arrived in hospital alive, he would have survived. Okay. The other thing he disputes is that the claim that handcuffing him essentially changed nothing. And he says, in fact, the reverse is true. There is a high likelihood that the police intervention contributed to Henry's death. He analysed the autopsy report, which points to damage to the subclavian vein as the main source of bleeding. Now, in a healthy person, venous bleeding occurs under low pressure and often self-limits thanks to the naturally forming clot, while simply approximating the wound edges and compressing the surrounding tissues closes the vein enough to slow or even stop the bleeding. The body camera footage shows that when police arrived on the scene, likely 5 to 10 minutes after the injury, Henry was conscious enough to speak loudly. He was therefore not yet in a terminal state. After his arms were twisted behind his back and handcuffed, the vein was most likely stretched, the clot torn, and bleeding dramatically intensified. Within just about 3 minutes, he lost consciousness and died. People with suspected internal injuries should never be moved or yanked abruptly. Such actions can destroy the natural clot and lead to massive internal hemorrhage. Instead of immediately calling a medical rescue team and handing the patient over to the paramedics, the police arrested him. If paramedics had arrived first on the scene, Henry's chances of survival would have been much higher, as high as 50%. And he goes on to say what could have been done. So paramedics could have quickly started an IV, administered fluids to increase circulating blood volume, and tranexamic acid to stabilise the clot, and if needed, performed needle decompression, inserting a large long needle into the lung, because the issue wasn't so much a lack of lung function, but compression of the blood-filled lung on the heart and mediastinum, which blocks circulation. Worse still, the incident took place just a few minutes' drive by car, 2 to 3 minutes by ambulance with sirens from Southampton University Hospital, a regional major trauma centre equipped with a full team of specialist procedures and equipment. And this doctor says, I am convinced that if Henry had arrived there alive, the doctors would not have let him die. And his opinion is that the aggressive police intervention, instead of saving a life, led to death through improper handling of a severely injured person, even though world-class care was just minutes away. I fear the judge and pathologists were too lenient toward the police. So, and that's a still from the body cam footage. You can see how very pale that hand is from blood loss. Again, like I say, I don't want to say that is like, authoritative. It's a professional opinion. But, it actually makes a lot of sense. And we're coming to the end, but we also have a series of people now taking the knee, and that trend has exploded across Britain. Thousands are kneeling for Henry Nowak, specifically to the track Michael Jackson. They don't really care about us. And the left are in complete meltdown. But there was one very heartwarming moment. Actually, I'm going to go here. I'm going to quickly go here. So I just wanted to talk about this. So the Criminal Justice Act 1988, section 139. So this pertains to the offence of having article with blade or point in public place. And here, so you're guilty. You're not to do it. There's no, but there are some exceptions. So section 139, subsection 5A is for use at work. Okay. It will be a defence for a person charged with an offence under this section to prove that he had the article with him, A, for use at work, B, for religious reasons, or C, as part of any national costume. So, use at work, that could be obviously a chef. It might be, it could be like a tree doctor or a lumberjack, you know, with a saw or an axe. And religious reasons. Now, the only religion that this exemption actually applies to is the Sikh. It doesn't apply to any other religion, 'cause no other religion actually carries weapons as part of their religious ceremonial duties. Although there is a Scottish clan, I cannot say for the life of me the name of the clan, but there is a Scottish clan. As part of Highland dress, they have like a dagger in the sock, and that's part of the full Highland dress up, basically. When we talk about national costume, we'll be talking about things like armed forces. You know, it would not be, you know, slutty nurse or anything like that. It would be something quite serious. And I'm going to give some personal experience here now. Both myself and my husband, we are martial artists. I have trained previously in Taekwondo. I moved into kickboxing and Kung Fu. My husband, he is, you know, a second-degree black sash in Kung Fu and kickboxing. We have competed at what was the WKC, the World Kickboxing Championship, in 2016. And, I wasn't there in 2016. My husband, his father and brother were. But in 2017, both myself and my husband competed in Portugal, in Albufeira. Beautiful place. And to get over, I'm going to show you an example of one of the weapons that we have, actually. Where is it? Right. This is not my husband. But what he is holding is called a Kwando. This is a really big weapon. Very heavy as well. The blade is, I wouldn't say it is overly sharp, right? It is usually quite blunt. But if you was to hit someone with that, you are really going to hurt them. And it could break skin. It could cut into them. Now, we had to get weapons like this. Swords, nunchucks, all kinds of things. Even a fan. Someone used a fan as part of a weapons routine. There were over 30 martial artists from our club representing England and Scotland who got on a Jet 2 plane and went from the UK to Portugal. And we all have swords, we all have kwandos. Like my husband quite often uses, they're like short knives, where there's 2 of them as well, and he does a routine with them. And trying to get the logistics of getting these into another country, all right, for a sports performance, a championship no less, right, was an absolute ball ache. And that's putting it mildly. We had to get, the club had to get, various licenses in place. The weapons had to be firmly packaged. They weren't traveling with us. They had to go ahead, all of them. And, then when we collected them in Portugal, you don't just take them off the carousel with your suitcase. You have to go to a special part of the airport, which is, buzzing with security and police. And, there is a very, very, intensive handover, like to make sure that you are who you say you are. You have transported them for the purposes that you have said you are, they are being transported for. And it was just such a lot for what was only like we were there for a 2-day event. And just the sheer effort that went into that, even though they weren't sharp, these were deliberately blunted weapons, bladed weapons, and they were for a purpose, i.e., we were trained martial artists, and we were going to a major sporting event, and the weapons were part of the routines. And then when we got to the end of that and did the competition, it was time to go back. We had to repeat the process all over again. And it became questionable whether it was even worth it. And sometimes, my husband doesn't take the kwando to practice to the kickboxing club, but he does, he has a sword. It is not a sharp sword. It's in a case and everything, which, when he needs it, he puts it in his car and he takes that with him to go and practice with. But, if he was pulled over and questioned, it might take some explaining, to the police officer. I'm sure it would be fine, though, because it is more of an imitation. The kwando, though, I would say, well, actually, that could really hurt someone. So should there be strict limits and controls? And there certainly seem to be. You wouldn't be necessarily ferrying that around, although people do go to the club with it. Me, I would be slightly more hesitant, but that's just me personally. But, when there are exemptions, like even for martial artists who use these as part of their sport, which in some cases are part of, it's a living, it's a job, they are not exempt either. There is no defence for them either. And what I will say is, as far as Bikram Digwa attempting to use the defence of, well, it was a ceremonial knife, as soon as he unsheathed it and as soon as he attempted to use it aggressively and threateningly, he loses that protection, right? So that, and the judge was not buying that defence either, which is why he got the sentence of life with a minimum of 21 years. I think that is still lenient, but he got this, he got a sentence. Let's see. What I will say though is the Sikh community have actually made a statement. They condemned these actions. They made it very clear that they do not represent any values of the Sikh community. And the British experience of Sikhs is actually it's incredibly positive. You know, they're such a lovely group, and we have, you know, there is very little in terms of, you know, problems like that we have. So this is not, you know, this is definitely not the case to be kind of, you know, having any kind of revenge against the community. They are disgusted themselves about it, and you know, they have been, we've always had a very good friendly relationship with the Sikh community, and you know, they have, they integrate so well with British people, and they're just a wonderful community. Now there is talk about should there be a ban on the kirpan. Now I don't have any strong opinion on this. I do think whatever, you know, that any discussions should involve the Sikh community, because like I say, this individual is not representative of like a growing problem with Sikhs at all. But there's two sides to it. There is the side that, you know, there is the exemption for the religious freedom and practices, which I don't think, you know, a lot of people still don't have a problem with that. But then on the flip side then, people are saying, well, okay, but it's not fair that they, you know, one group of people, for whatever the reason, get to carry around legally sharp-bladed weapons which, you know, can inflict fatal injuries. You know, when the rest of the country has been disarmed, you know, no one else is allowed. And again, it comes back to, well, is that equality really? And I think the one thing that people have said, which I entirely agree with, is when the UK is the rape capital, is being called the rape capital of Europe, I think it's quite shameful that women cannot carry around something like pepper spray. Something, you know, they are given special devices to prevent their drinks being spiked. They are given rape alarms, but at the end of the day, they are not allowed to carry anything that might, you know, help them in the event of an actual attack. And I am very much in favour of women being able to carry something. And whilst I'm, you know, I've got no problem with this, with, you know, the Sikh community continuing to enjoy the protection and defence of being able to carry their kirpans, I do feel that there is an issue that needs to be addressed regarding the safety of women. You know, women is always, don't wear this, don't travel on your, don't, you know, walk around late at night on your own, you know, walk in groups. You know, you have to cover your drink, and it's never about addressing the root cause of the problem. And there are no tools available at women's disposal to be able to fight back. So I think there needs to be a balance there. People, you know, a lot of people feel quite strongly about that, and I don't disagree with that myself. As someone, you know, who has kind of encountered those situations, yes, I do think that there needs to be, women should be allowed to carry something. I'm not saying a knife or a gun, but you know, pepper spray. I mean, really, why not? It might make their eyes sting. Well, you know, that's the risk that is taken when someone attempts to rape a woman, and I think that's a fair trade-off. Now, I wanted to kind of end on a bit of a positive note. Let me share this tab. Okay. A lot of people from the left political side in particular said, you know, said to the people who are protesting or are kind of expressing strong outrage about the murder of Henry Nowak and just the two-tier, you know, justice system and policing in general. They've said, oh, you don't cause division, you know, don't be hateful, don't be this. And the thing is, right, is they're not. That's just it. It's almost like the government are making these warnings and stating these things to try and falsely imply that there is division and hate being stirred up, and there is not. And I found this really warming story where a Sikh taxi driver actually, during the protests at Southampton police station the other night, he actually came over, shook hands and fist bumped protesters who were marching, you know, to protest the murder of Henry Nowak. And it's lovely photos. Look at this. There's no hate here. You know, people, because of this, haven't gone on to hate the Sikh community as a whole. And yeah, they're upset and outraged at the death and the murder of this young man. And they're outraged and angry at the murderer and his family for the way it was handled and what they did. But they are outraged with the police because the police are supposed to be there to help. They are supposed to, you know, be non-biased. And there's been a lot of concern about, you know, bias in the police forces. You know, when they are doing demonstrations, waving pride flags or wearing, you know, pride gear as well. It's not even just, you know, towards ethnic minorities. When they very clearly announce their support for the LGBTQ community, I'm not saying don't you know, support these causes, but when you make it so public, it brings into question: are you going to be fair? Do you harbour bias? And it then that's what causes division and mistrust with the police. But in this case, you know, the anger is towards the police, right? Because a man literally said 9 times, "I can't breathe and I've been stabbed," and he was met with ridicule, with laughter, with being called a racist in the body cam footage. All of this is happening, and then when he said, "I've been stabbed," this police officer said, "No, I don't think you have, mate." And it's like she hadn't even checked. That is the worst bit. She made that statement, made that judgment without even checking it, which is absolutely vile. So that's where the anger is, and I think it's absolutely fair. And as I've sort of shown already with some of the guidance, you know, it is not. I don't think it is unfair to be kind of saying, "Hey, we think that there is a 2-tier system here, which is disproportionately, you know, having a negative impact on white people." And there is an anti-white sentiment going on. We're living in an era where some schools are, you know, kind of teaching, some schools and universities are teaching white people that they should be ashamed of their skin colour, like they can do anything about that. Or they should be, you know, ashamed of their history. The history being over, you know, hundreds of years ago is stuff that is completely out of their control. And I'm very much in support of correcting injustice. All injustice, especially racism, where it needs to be corrected. But the danger is when you overcorrect, it does more harm than good. And when people start dying because of that overcorrection, it just causes anger. And you don't want that. But for the government and some like high profile commentators to be suggesting that, you know, now all these protesters are going to, you know, basically go after the Sikh community with pitchforks, you know, and put all these wild, scary, very false suggestions out there, is is absolutely shocking. But as you can see from this picture, that's just not happening in the UK at all. And, you know, there's solidarity. There is solidarity. No one is blaming the Sikh community for the actions of one person. And the reason it has been different, right, because I do appreciate people say, well, you know, a lot of the Sikh community get blamed. Yes, they do actually. It's not all Muslims at all. Did I say it right? Yeah. So a lot of the Muslim community get blamed for the crimes, and there is a difference there. And the difference being that when it comes to Islam, the problem is the extremists, right? There are so many Muslims who are just absolutely wonderful. My best friends in university were all Muslims. They were some of the nicest people I have ever met in my life. But when you get the extremists who practice Islam, they are extremely extreme. You know, and there are, like, the number one terror threat is still from Islamists. And it's the scale as well. Like, we are having almost daily reports of rapes or stabbings by Islamists. The grooming gangs it was literally hundreds of men, hundreds of Muslim men from dozens of towns across the UK. I think the latest report is that there was something like 9,000 grooming gangs in London alone. But they were all over the place. They were in, you know, Bradford, Peterborough, Manchester, Birmingham. You know, they were across the country. And then on top of that, no one from their community calls it out. Like, the Sikhs come straight out and called this out. They didn't have to. And no one asked them to. But it definitely goes a long way that they did it. But with when we have the issues, you know, where the perpetrator is an Islamist, then we have it's a much more bigger scale of a problem, and it just does not get called out by the community. So that's where that's why there is such a difference between the perception of extreme Islamists and Sikhs. Right. And finally, I'm just going to wrap up with this very humorous. It's not funny, but you know, I think it's it's meant as a bit of humour, I guess. So this post, Hampshire police, who were the police force who arrested Henry Nowak as he was dying, they put up a post saying, we know there has been significant commentary following the sentencing of Vikram Digwa yesterday afternoon, and we recognise the desire for answers about the police response that night. However, what we cannot accept is the significant spread of misinformation online by those intent of causing further fear and division by making threats to officers and sharing names that are simply not true. A police officer unrelated to this case has been misidentified online and subject to death threats, right, which I don't agree with. People should not do that. The Independent Office for Police Conduct is continuing its independent investigation into our response on the night in question, following our self-referral the next day. While that progresses, we ask that people avoid harmful speculation online. And then there's a community note added. There is no evidence available publicly to support the claim that a police officer has received death threats. And then someone was put in quotes, I don't think he did, mate. So, yeah. Where we are now with this case, so there are going to be further charges. So yeah, where we are now, the CPS has authorised new charges against Vikram Digwa and his brother and father for Henry Nowak's murder. They will appear at Southampton Court this afternoon. So this was June the 2nd, Tuesday. So Vikram Digwa The new charges are 6 counts of possessing an offensive weapon in private place on 4th of December. 6 counts of possessing an offensive weapon in a private place on 4th of December for his father. And then for his brother, 6 counts of possessing an offensive weapon in a private place on 4th of December. One count of possessing an offensive weapon in a public place on the 4th of December. 1 count of possessing a prohibited weapon on 4th of December. And 2 counts of possessing a knife blade / sharp pointed article in a public place on 4th of December. So I will probably catch up with what's happening there. We are also waiting for the sentencing of the mother as well, who was found guilty. So yeah, it's a lot. This has been a longer video than I thought, but there is a lot to go through, and there's a lot more I could have said as well. But I think I will leave it here for now. Let me know what you think. That was intended to be as fair and balanced and respectful as possible, so I hope no one is offended. But you know, we have to be able to say things, otherwise, because that's why things, you know, don't get reported honestly. But yeah, the UK is in a right mess at the moment, so yeah, just keep us in your thoughts and prayers. Alright guys, so let me know what you think about this video in the comments, and if there's any questions or you want anything like a follow-up for anything, I'm happy to do that too. The next video I've got to come will be a fee motion from Brian Friedman, for those who are following anything related to Blake Lively. This one is the Friedman, the estate of Travis Flores. So there will be there's been a request for fees, and I will cover that.